Hi everyone, and welcome to Culture Anthropology, Anthro 102 here at Lake Tahoe Community College. So what I'm going to do in all of these lecture videos that you'll get for each of the weeks in the class is to go through the main readings that you'll be looking at, talk about any supplemental readings, discuss any media that might be relevant, talk a little bit about my background in research, and also focus on kind of core themes for each of the weeks. If you're taking this class in a typical term in the fall, winter, or spring, we have 11 weeks of instruction and then finals week. If you take it in the summer, that's compressed into 6 or even less weeks. So if you take this class in the summer, keep in mind that you might be asked to watch, say, week 1, 2, and even 3 in the same week of the summer, just because of the fact that summer is a more compressed quarter. And it makes it a little more challenging, frankly, but it's also nice if you take a class in the summer because you can get it done in a shorter amount of time, almost half the time as a traditional term class. So in the traditional term class here, we'll just go through each week the lecture topics and go through it, and you'll watch one per week. It kind of goes along sequentially. So what I'm doing in this is not like a traditional lecture. I'm not going to go through the entire book. I'm not going to cover every single concept. I'm going to highlight key things and also make some connections using my expertise as a cultural anthropologist to how this relates to issues in the world, to topics you might consider on your own, situations like travel that we'll be talking about here in the early weeks of the class, and also my own research, because one of the cool things about taking a college class is that you can get some insights from your instructors as they are professionals in your field. If you take a class in automotive tech, for example, someone who's really experienced in repairing cars can give you their hands-on perspectives working for a mechanic shop, a dealership, and so forth. Likewise, if you're taking a GE class like Culture Anthropology, you can gain perspectives from your instructors as they've experienced these disciplines in their own experiences as students, as researchers, as professionals in their field, and also working here at a college environment where you've been teaching some of these topics for many years. The other thing you're going to notice in these lectures is I'll give you 3 main themes for each week just to kind of orient our understandings of what we're talking about. And as I go through these slides, you'll get a sense of what I'm intending by looking at these various themes. And this kind of has the background on what we'll cover every week. So I mentioned the themes. We'll talk about those. The media would be any videos or web pages that you'll link to and check out, either in an optional basis or in some cases for a graded assignment, such as some of our papers. We'll also cover the readings. The readings come from 2 sources. One is the textbook, which is your free open source textbook that's linked for each week in the quarter. And then the second would be some optional readings that can supplement some of the ideas that aren't included in the textbook. The other thing to mention here is I'm suggesting these optional Jamboards, and the Jamboards will connect with a live Zoom meeting that we'll have. I'm going to leave it open to see how the live meetings work. If not a lot of people are interested in live meetings, we may cut back on these or not do them later in the quarter. This is a distance education class, and you're not required to meet live on Zoom. The reason for that is you need that flexibility with your schedule. So anything that we do via Zoom or these Jamboards that I'll talk about is purely optional. You can still get 100% of the points possible in the class just by doing all the assignments and never once participating in a Zoom session or a Jamboard. That being said, the Zoom session and the Jamboard topics can certainly help you with some of your assignments, your readings, your papers, and things of that nature. So these are optional, but they're definitely worthwhile. And what I'll try to do is, as I schedule those, I will try to think about different days and times, not everything during the day, but some in the evening for working professionals out there who have an 8 to 5 schedule and then have the rest of the evening off and so forth. We'll also talk about assignments, discussions, quizzes, and anything else that might come up if it's related to what we're covering for this particular week of the lecture. Now, one thing I would really want to recommend here starting in week 1, before we get into the lecture content, is go over the entire class, look at the modules, make sure you understand everything in the class. And to do that, you'll just go to your home button, and I'm looking at this in a different view, but the module structure is what shows you everything that's due for the week, including the readings, the objectives, and so forth. And definitely check this out, because when you click on the objectives, like the themes I'm sharing, the objectives are really going to show you a clear indication of what's coming up that week and what you should understand after you read the text. And so that's always important, just to make sure you follow the modules, the syllabus, get all the background information you need for the class, and look over those course objectives. So the approach that I'm using for these lectures, I would say, would be more like what I could call is a travelogue. So you're going to get glimpses, little bits of ideas, key themes, sort of summaries, as opposed to actually traveling to a place. So, years ago, there were things like the grand tours, and people would go on these vacations, also often very elite people. And this is a good image to look at because we will probably talk about sort of the legacy of colonialism across the world and how it's impacted people. So very often the people doing these grand tours were very wealthy. It's a much different travel situation than we're familiar with today. And at least in 2019 through 21, we're still dealing with, COVID, and so that's affected a lot of travel. But with a travel log, someone would travel to a place, take a picture. This is one of those stereoscopic images that you could look at kind of three-dimensional with the viewers. And they would have a description, where they're standing and what the general place is like, where they're at, what they felt, and how this particular place maybe had some significance in culture or history. So it's like a little bit of information that you get about a place, but you can't obviously feel what it was like, the smells, the sights, and the sounds of actually traveling, in this case, to Egypt. So it's definitely something that is about a travelogue, at least. It's something about giving you the sense of a place or a thing, but not giving you everything about it. And that's really what these lectures are focused on. It's not about taking you through the book, start to finish. That you kind of do on your own. It's more like thinking about the key themes and topics and context that can make our discussions online a little more interesting, as well as if we want to jump on for Zoom, make those conversations a little bit better and more informed. Having more information from the book, from the readings, the materials, before you start your discussions is really key because you're going to have just a more nuanced understanding of things. So we start off with chapter 1, and I try to give you page numbers on here. And as you follow along in the video, you can just pause the video. I'm not going to make these PowerPoints public. I kind of want to encourage you to watch the videos and not just watch the PowerPoints. But for each week, what you'll do is you go to your module, and in week 1, I'm giving a little more of this running through the course, but I definitely keep in mind that you watch that important video that I have for you that is under the Getting Started module, and it's called Navigate This Class. When you click on this video, it will tell you exactly how to go through the class and do the assignments and everything. So definitely watch that. And as you know, there's a little Getting Started quiz that you have to take in the class, and so it's very helpful also to watch these videos I have listed for you up here. So after the learning objectives, I want to click on my chapter assignment or reading for that week, and I can either download it here or I can just click to the PDF. Once you click on the PDF, it's very straightforward. You just scroll through it, and you have the page numbers listed at the bottom. You can resize this. You could save it to your desktop, however you want to do it. So when I'm doing these PowerPoints is saying, when we talk about the theme or topic of what is anthropology, back in our textbook, that starts on page 5. So definitely look at what anthropology is. It's often very hard to define because it's so broad. It's literally, as you look here, logos refers to the study of something, and anthropos is human. It means the study of anything human. So that is really, really broad, as they mention here, the authors do. And as a result, we could say anything under the sun could be the focus of anthropological study. So anything you think of in terms of your body and biology, anything you think of in terms of our human evolution, great historic sites of the world like with archaeology, places in the present, people doing urban anthropology or studying diseases as we might now during COVID, the pandemic, as part of medical anthropology. And then my own specialization is in cultural anthropology. In just a second, we'll talk about what's meant by the 4 fields. And the 4 fields is an acknowledgement of the really huge, broad nature of anthropology and how we can narrow it down a little bit for the sake of even like assigning classes that we teach at colleges, because it's often very important to distinguish between the folks who teach biological anthro and cultural anthro. Those are often not the same people, although some of us do teach some specializations within all of the 4, or even the 5th subfield that we call applied anthropology. So look this over and definitely get a sense of what is meant by anthropology. Then you get a long discussion of what cultural anthropology is before later you'll get a sense of what the 4 fields are. So our first area to focus on is what anthropology is. Now, if you wanted to, you could look at the 2 videos, and you'll find the videos, and I'll just do this again for the first week. Go back to our class modules, and once you're at the modules for each week, you'll want to click on the media. if there's media available, and I believe each week has media. Just click on any of these videos. If you want to watch it directly on YouTube, that option will pop up. And so what I recommend is you might look at my video on the introductory ideas, and also you can look at anthropology at Lake Tahoe Community College, which gives you a little bit of a sense of what classes we offer if you're interested in like future classes to study, to take as a student here at the college. And as I go through both of these videos, I give you some perspectives, and these are pretty good perspectives to know because they come up in our readings in the first few weeks of the class. So for example, we learn about cultural relativism. That's a perspective where you have a deep appreciation and understanding of a culture in its own sense, such that it's seen as a meaningful and coherent and viable way of living. As opposed to the opposite of that is ethnocentrism, which is that viewpoint saying like, I don't like people from particular countries. We had a president, for example, that talked about shithole nations, Haiti, African nations, and so forth. So anyone who says something like that is being ethnocentric. They're expressing contempt for another culture or another place and how those people live. So one of the things we try to do in anthropology is to stress cultural relativism. We'll talk about some limits to that because we certainly wouldn't want to apply cultural relativism to cases of genocide or female genital mutilation, maybe the things going on right now in Afghanistan in 2021 with the return of the Taliban and their brutality and how they treat women and ethnic minorities and different religious groups. We don't always apply cultural relativism, but it's a principle that gets us starting to think about tolerance as we understand it. Now, one example of that would be travel. If you travel to another culture and you just get tired of that culture and you say like, I don't like how things are. I mean, that's a natural part of what we call culture shock, which is a sense of shock that develops when you experience a different culture. You know, you're not used to the customs in that culture. And as a result, you kind of have this like personal feeling that develops, and sometimes it makes you upset. Sometimes it makes you want to leave. Cultural anthropologists say that field work institutionalizes culture shock. It takes it. And fieldwork, by the way, is a research method that we use to study the world. We go to another culture, we take detailed notes, we learn the language, we observe, we make recordings, maybe with our cameras. And so sometimes culture shock moments can be very insightful. If something seems strange to us at first, later it can be familiar to us. Likewise, once we return from a long period of travel and experience culture shock and adapted to that culture, when we come back home, we realize that our own customs back home become very strange. So there's this interesting what we call dichotomy between these two opposites, the strange and the familiar. So sometimes the strange, as you travel and experience another culture, becomes familiar once you understand it and take the time to really get the nuances and context of what's so strange, and the strange becomes less strange. And then likewise, you come back home and you say, wow, you know, what used to be familiar to me back home seems a little bit strange. This happened to me years ago. I was teaching through our college in London in the UK. And for the time I was living there, which was about 2 months, I didn't drive anywhere. I didn't have a car. I never got behind the wheel. I always walked and I took trains. And what was really strange for me coming back was after like 2 months of not driving, being back home was just driving, just the experience of, getting behind the wheel, dealing with traffic, having to be aware and stuff. The great thing about, being in cultures that have really great mass transit systems, maybe unlike the US, is you can kind of veg out, sleep, read a book, go on your phone and do your social media updates or whatever on a train, and you can't do that in a car. So it's just one of the things that I noticed when I came back home was that sense of the familiar aspect of driving before I left. I get back home to my home place, my home culture, and it seems a little more strange to me. So think about cultural relativism as it applies to some of these contexts, most notably that of travel. Now, one thing we'll talk about that's really important in anthropology is getting a sense of the value of context. I think the example of sports could apply here when you learn a new sport or skill. So years ago, when I was first learning classic cross-country skiing, and then later skate skiing, which is more advanced and a different stride, a lot of it was really trying to get a feel for something. And if you work with someone really good as a teacher, it's almost like intuitive. And that's kind of what happens with culture, right? Like a lot of times you just kind of know how to do certain things. In the US, there's a certain way that you approach, for example, being in the DMV, taking numbers, waiting in line, kind of being impatient and expecting things to happen a certain way. That's the case for like any culture out there in any situation. So knowing the context of something is really important to anthropologists. An example of kind of the opposite of that might be something like talk radio. If you listen to talk radio, it's often someone yelling, or you see this on social media. They're not trying to express nuance or context of something. They're giving you an opinion, often not informed, not based on any information, based on conspiracy theories. We can think of this now with vaccinations, where people have conspiracies that there are microchips being inserted into their blood and so forth. Again, if you know the context of how vaccines work. If you talk to anyone, as I talk to some of my friends who are biochemists or they work at Barton Hospital as doctors, as nurses, they can tell you all the ins and outs of vaccines and the dangers. And believe me, the danger of the vaccine is outweighed by what it does for you. But the conspiracy theories that you hear on talk radio often don't consider context or information and instead focus on emotion and rhetoric and hype. And as a result of that, people get misinformation. They can also end up being not very open to the world. Openness is also something that we think is very important and key in cultural anthropology. So again, tolerance and cultural relativism are always keys. And then the idea comes up of intercultural communication. Again, this is all from that video. And you could think of examples of food, travel, and language. With intercultural communication, you try to establish relationships between different cultures and ways of talking to one another and understanding that are based on cultural relativism and not on ethnocentrism. Again, the limits of cultural relativism would be if you have genocide being committed like we see by the Taliban. We don't know what's happening now, but their track record in the past was terrible in terms of human rights, in terms of what happened to women and so forth. So it's definitely something to think about and consider, because everything has a limit in terms of tolerance. And I also mentioned in the video, it's a little old, we're coming off of the Trump presidency, but the Trump worldview, I would say, is something completely at odds with a lot of the disciplines that you might study in the humanities, anthropology, psychology, political science. And it's not to say that his political perspective is wrong, but there's the political perspective that someone has, like a classic conservative like George Will, if you know that name, versus someone like Trump, who what he was doing half of the time or 80% of the time wasn't even about politics. His own party was often upset with him. He was attacking people, making fun of them because of their weight, making derogatory comments about women, expressing attitudes of wanting to commit violence against other people. So a lot of what he expressed with his worldview, or what we call cosmology, is definitely at odds with a lot of the things you'll study in college. And I'm not trying to be overtly political, because again, I think a candidate's particular political party doesn't matter. But what Trump did wouldn't be acceptable for Democrats, Republicans, libertarians, socialists. Again, he's still popular with a lot of people, but that says a little bit about maybe intolerance and some issues of intolerance that we still have in the United States. So also, I recommend these 4 introductory ideas of exploring the world and appreciating diversity, challenging yourself and being what we call reflexive, discovering things on your own using methods and insights, and then considering solutions such as in applied and public anthropology, which we'll talk about at the end of the quarter. So I'm showing you here an image just from some of my travels. I get to travel a lot, or I used to before COVID. This was from my travel in Singapore, and I was giving a paper on cultural heritage, which connects really closely to some of the ideas we'll be talking about in this class. And I was at Changi Airport, which is a really amazing airport, one of the most innovative and interesting in the world as far as like attractions. And this is something I'd never seen before. This they call the social media tree. And it was an interactive screen that you could use to send social media messages. And I just thought it was very different in terms of what I expected to see anywhere, and certainly in an airport. So one of the cool things you could do is whenever you travel, snap a picture like this, make some notes, get a good notebook. I'm trying to look for one of my field books. I don't have it here, but I always take a Moleskine notebook with me and a pen. And you could also have your phone. Very easy using a phone in these days to do quasi-anthropological research, take photos and videos. If you do any blogging, if you're active in social media, it could make for a great TikTok video, something on Facebook, something on Twitter, whatever your favorite social media site happens to be. This is another site from Singapore, and this is what's called a hawker market. And there's an interesting story about one hawker market in Singapore. I don't think it was this one. It may have been this one. I have to look it up. But it actually got a Michelin star for the quality of its food. And you could get this particular chicken dish for a couple bucks. But these hawker markets are these really large, like our equivalent of a food court And they have all this table seating, and you go up, you order. All the tables have numbers, and you have to give like the number when you order, and the food often will be brought out to you, or in some cases, I think maybe you have to wait. But for me, this was something very different, because in the US, when I think of a food court, it's generally kind of nasty food, right? Like it's just not very good, although there are some exceptions. There are some really good food courts I've been to, like in Portland and Las Vegas, just depending on the place. But the hawker market was nothing like fast food. Like, yes, it came out quickly, but it just had a different local feel. There were no chains that I noted, and it was really all about sampling different cuisines, because Singapore is this interesting melting pot of all sorts of Asian and Indian and different cuisines coming together. And so you get this like melange or hybrid form of cuisine that is like a sampling of different worlds in terms of spices, dishes, techniques, and flavors. And so it's really cool when you travel sometimes to see this. And again, this is not really culture shock that I experienced, but more like a question like, oh, this is really unique and different. Why aren't our food courts and malls more like this? And so it just, again, gives you a little bit of insight, being able to go back home and look at things differently. This was a place, and I was giving a conference presentation. I also had a chance to do a ton of field work, and I'll talk about this later. I do work in what I call themed and immersive spaces. And this was a place called Gardens by the Bay, a really cool interactive place with music and natural, and as you see, also synthetic structures. This is the famous Marina Bay Sands hotel, which has a swimming pool at the top. If you're into infinity pools, they have one of the best ones. Very cool, expensive place to be, certainly Singapore overall, but some amazing opportunities to see different sites, to travel, and to also eat some incredible food. And this was another place, because I study theme parks. This one was really on my list. And I'm just showing you my Google photos. This place is called Haw Par Villa, and it was also known as Tiger Balm Gardens. And I always heard this described as a Buddhist theme park. And I don't know if you'd really call it a theme park, but it was definitely a place where different parables from Buddhist philosophy are brought to life, if you will, different fables. Not unlike maybe in Germany, you could go to a theme park and see the Brothers Grimm, fairy tales expressed, or Hans Christian Andersen, or folks who wrote these kind of great tales in the past. And so it was just very, I just have to say, odd, but in kind of a good way, just seeing these different sculptures. And some of it, was very surreal, like these mice carrying another mouse on a stretcher. And they have the 10 courts of hell that you can visit. So just very, very interesting, curious, like kind of a bit nightmarish, at some level. Definitely, like if you were, maybe tired or something, I don't know if you'd want to see all of this necessarily, because there's a lot of brutal stuff that's being depicted. But it's a representation, and it's something that I've never seen anywhere else. So I took a ton of photos, and I even did a little video on this for my YouTube site, which I feature a lot of the spaces I visit, and I'll talk about this later in some future videos. But I like to take my research and make it more publicly accessible, particularly using the world of YouTube. It's much better for connecting with people. And there's even the Statue of Liberty here. It's easier to connect that way with people in everyday life than asking them to read sometimes your professional publications. So that is kind of the some of the sights and sound. I think it's just really cool and fascinating to visit places like this. I always say, like, when you travel, it's great to find things that are off the beaten path and not just go to the most touristy places, because I think in a lot of Singapore guidebooks, they wouldn't talk about this particular place. And it's too bad, because it's super, super fascinating, and it's a place that has some attractions and sculptures and features. I can't believe how many photos I took. I kid you not, I have like somewhere near 50,000 photos on my Google here. My Google Photos used to be on a different site that went out of business or started charging. But one of the reasons I keep all these is because they're kind of my notes, in addition to field notes and any like audio recordings I might do on my phone or audio device to remember visiting a place. I also want to have visual memories, and I kid you not, in publications, in conference presentations, having so many photos to use is golden, because then I can go back and say, oh yeah, there was this image here, and I want to show you guys this image. So it's a little bit of just like what that research looks like if you're curious. And from time to time in this class, I'll definitely be talking about these research experiences and trips and so forth. This is another site from Singapore. So another cool thing about visiting a different culture is like different sights and smells and tastes. And this is a durian. And it's a very notorious fruit. A lot of people say that I actually I didn't taste durian when I was there, but a lot of people have arguments about whether it tastes good or bad. But there's like no arguments about the smell of the durian. And in fact, in some cultures, including Singapore, where you could say it's very restrictive. Singapore is a culture where they have the death penalty for any kind of drug trafficking. So there's a lot of controversy certainly about some of Singapore's laws. And I believe there's one law that you can't take a durian onto public transit. You could be fined for that because it's so stinky. And I was able to smell it. It's very distinctive. It's so stinky that, you could really upset most of your train car if you're traveling on the subway. So certain places, they have different fruits, vegetables, foods, and you can kind of take that in as all part of that experience. I really got hooked on this particular Singapore egg dish. I should have had it cracked open, but this is a really soft egg. It's super, super runny, like I guess we'd call it soft cooked. And so a tradition there is this really good dark coffee, which is my favorite coffee. And you crack these eggs into a bowl. You definitely need a bowl for this. And then you could dip the toast in there. And so it's almost like you're using your toast as a vessel to suck up all the gooiness of the eggs. If you're vegan, you're disgusted by this likely. So don't eat this if you're vegan. It wouldn't be vegan safe. But the interesting thing about the toast here, I was shocked to see all that butter. I can't imagine each of the halves of the bread had that much butter. That's like not quite a cube, but a quarter of a cube for the whole meal. So I scraped the butter off, but really cool meal. And I had heard about this before I traveled to Singapore. Someone said, you have to try these eggs because they are like the local thing and they're amazing. And there was another dish that I don't have pictures of as well. That was a dinner dish that was really super amazing. So a little bit of my travel log there from Singapore. Now, often people will say that anthropology is the art of awareness. I actually heard this in my very first anthropology class. And I was at the time, I'll talk about this later, but a music major, and I took one anthro class in cultural anthropology, just like you're taking. I got super hooked on it and then changed my major, got 3 degrees in anthropology. So I was at first very interested in music, still do a lot of music, but my college interest in anthropology was sparked by taking a class, and this particular instructor really wanted us to gain awareness and say, if you take anthropology, don't worry about like learning all the terms and concepts and theories. Those are important, but use it as a way to develop your own awareness of the world, your own perspective, your own biases. It's something I've carried with me way back from when I was an undergraduate student. I won't tell you when that was. It was ages ago. Many of you probably weren't born, but I always remember that. It's the art of awareness. Now, I mentioned that the 4 fields are discussed in the textbook. So go back to chapter 1 and look at pages 10 to 14. These are all laid out. In short, we have cultural anthropology, which we're studying today, and that includes a lot of these sub-areas. So it's everything about studying society and culture and people, beliefs, religion, all that kind of stuff. You can also take archaeology, and I'll show you a little bit from my own archaeological experiences as an undergrad student on a dig, but that is oftentimes going to historic or prehistoric sites, digging them up, analyzing the artifacts, analyzing the site. It could also be sites in the present. A guy named Bill Rathje did a whole garbage archaeology project, which was going through people's trash and also through dump sites and looking at the material remains and comparing that to what people said about their own consumption behaviors, how much trash they perceived as using, and how much was actually in their trash. And typically in that study, people would say like, well, I don't waste that much. And then they go through the trash and they're like, well, no, actually you waste a lot. So it's kind of a cool way in that sense of understanding that archaeology could be something that you study in the present as well. You can also study biological anthropology and look at genetics. You could look at primates. You could study anthropometrics, studies of the body, measurements, looking at things like locomotion, how we learn to walk as we evolved from our primate lineage and so forth. And then also linguistic anthropology or language and culture, which studies all the nuances of language. There's a 5th field, and it's not as well represented. In fact, we have an applied anthro class here at the college. I haven't offered it in years because it's always low enrolled, which is too bad. But when you get to the end of the class in weeks 10 or 11, we start talking about, through Robert Borofsky's work, public and applied anthropology. And it basically says you take what you learn in the other 4 fields, whatever that is, you try to apply it to an actual practical situation. So maybe in your study in bioanthro about disease, you study something about genetics and you discover something that relates to a possible cure to something, or you collaborate with other medical researchers and you create a cure. And the same could be said for the other 4 subfields. So applied anthropology is applying what you know to practical solutions in the world. So here's some more Travelogue stuff just to give you a sense of, like, frankly, it's fun to look back at the old days. I look so much younger and different in these photos. I think we all have that experience when we look at our old photos. That's me right here with the baseball cap. And just talking a little bit here about my experiences as an undergrad student. I was a sophomore in college and I had a chance to participate in a historic archaeology dig. It was a wonderful experience. We lived on the bank of the Ohio River in southern Indiana, and we studied a late Mississippian site called Angel Mound. It's a very cool Native American site. And we went there, we did our digs, we each had our plot, and we worked for weeks on this one plot. And over time, I don't have the photos, we dug down more and more and more. What's cool about archaeology is you really do get that sense of, like, you're definitely, like, working with your hands. You're doing artifact analysis, you're recording data, you're also working with a team, so it's great for learning team building. I think archaeology is a great subfield if you're interested in, like, team projects, because there's so much teamwork that goes on. We also lived together. We again each had our own sites that we worked on, and you can see some of the equipment here. There's a lot of work, not unlike survey work that you do in archaeology when you're mapping your sites out. The precision of having a very accurate site map is really key in archaeology. And again, a lot of fun playing some music here with one of the guitarists. That's me with the saxophone. And we just, had fun, not just doing archaeology, but also hanging out. And wow, my hair was super long in that video. I guess I was growing it long back in the day. So the breadth of anthropology, we talked about this already. It's just so broad that it's pretty cool to think that anything you think of related to humans could be the object of study. And I think that's why so many of us, myself included, have been attracted to anthropology, because you don't have any limitations in terms of what you possibly could study. In an undergraduate sense, you take classes in each of the 4 subfields: archaeology, linguistic, cultural, bioanthro, maybe applied anthro. I never took it as an undergrad or a graduate student at any of my schools: Indiana University, University of Iowa, and also Rice University. And I was for 1 year when I switched my major. I was at a school called Albion College in Michigan. And actually, I left Albion because I switched from being a music major to an anthro major. And I needed to find a school that had a bigger cohort of anthropology instructors and classes, because it was a really small school, and that wasn't one of their big areas. Now, when you become a graduate student, either master's or PhD, you specialize in one of the 4 subfields. I knew a few people back at Indiana who were graduate students, maybe one guy I could think of, and he actually did archaeology and cultural and tried to do both. Most of us specialize in one area. So when I did my graduate work at Iowa and then my PhD at Rice, I was primarily focused on cultural anthropology, though in the graduate program at Iowa, I was also required to take what was called one pro-seminar in each of the 4 subfields. So that can happen at the graduate level. It's very rare at the PhD level. You typically are only focused on your subfield, if that's archaeology, bio, linguistic, or cultural, or applied. This is me back in the day doing a music performance. And again, for me, I was really interested in music, and I thought about doing music as a major, but taking that one anthro class changed the directions. And I still find ways to do music. In fact, in this fall, I'm offering a special topics on the anthropology of sound and music. I don't know if it's going to go. It's very low enrolled at the moment, but there are ways, to continue that interest of mine, even in anthropology, studying some of that. And I may talk about some of that in the future. Now, also in Chapter 1, check out the discussion of culture on page 6. And if we do a Jamboard for week 1 or a Zoom meeting, we'll talk a little more about culture. Again, the book has a definition of culture that you can check out. And so just go to page 6. And they talk about culture as being a really powerful defining characteristic that shapes our perceptions, behaviors, and relationships. And this kind of gives you the exact definition. So my question always in this class for you is, like, well, do you think culture exists? Because when you see something happening in the news and you don't agree with it, does that mean you're part of the culture? What if you're part of a subculture? Like if you're a vegan and you don't eat or consume animal-based products, and you see commercials on TV for animal-based products or whatever, fast food, how do you feel about that? Do you feel like your way of understanding your culture is different? Are you a part of it? What defines culture for you? What defines you? How are you a part or not a part of your culture? So something we'll consider more depth as we continue our discussions this week. So for anthropological thinking, check out chapter 1, pages 8 to 10. And this is a little more of that perspective like I'm laying out here in this mini lecture. So this talks about how the history of anthropology took place in terms of different people who were not anthropologists per se, but gave us some insights about, and this talks about, traveling and documenting the world, different famous thinkers from the past. And this talks about a little bit about how anthropology developed from an armchair approach where people just simply sat and read papers that maybe missionaries had collected about particular cultures and just reinterpreted. Bronislaw Malinowski, the famous Polish anthropologist who lived from 1884 to 1942, pioneered what he called participant observation. It's a method of immersion. You put yourself in another culture for a long period of time, you learn the language, and you take detailed notes. And so Malinowski was a revolutionary with his work called Argonauts of the Western Pacific in the Trobriand Islands, located near Australia and Papua New Guinea. And he was a revolutionary because he said you have to understand the people by participating in their daily lives and understanding them and studying them through fieldwork. And then Franz Boas, a very important anthropologist from Columbia University, started really the first American anthropology department and was really prominent in cultural relativism, which is that perspective we're talking about. And here's the 4 fields again. You get a nice description of these as we talked about earlier. Then I believe we get into the anthropological perspectives, so right there in the book. So chapter 1, pages 14 and onwards, look at these. They're super important. You see all the perspectives listed here, and the examples are really good. As you're reading your textbook, either read the examples, look at what they describe things as, or try to apply it to your own situation. It makes it a lot more easy to understand. And those end on page 17. If you're watching this and the edition changes and the pages change, then there'll be maybe some adjustment you have to do. I'm just working on the current edition. So holism, the perspective of seeing the entirety, the whole of culture. Cultural relativism is already addressed as opposed to the opposite, ethnocentrism. Comparative studies, comparing one thing to another, including, like I said, comparing my driving in London or not driving in London and then coming back here to Nevada and California and driving a car again after a long time of not doing that. Doing the in-depth field work, and then appreciating that you could look at anthropology from scientific sides or humanistic sides. In fact, I have this chart that I often use in the in-person version of this class where I try to show that any of the social sciences you take, including anthro, soc, history, econ, poli-sci, psychology, have both quantitative and qualitative dimensions. So quantitative research is often number-based and statistical-based, using SPSX and doing big data crunching. You see a lot of this in sports right now, the big data movement and analytics in football and basketball. A lot of people hate it. Purists hate analytics in sports, but some swear by it and say that if you study all the nuances of player stats and performance stats, you can make decisions in real time on the court, football or basketball, other sports probably as well. Those are the only two I really watch, but you could make real-time decisions and then that can help you win and perform better. Qualitative methods would be, reading text, doing surveys, interviewing people, doing what Malinowski called in the textbook participant observation. But it's important to note, and this branch here is the field studies, which are really key in what we're going to talk about in Culture Anthro. But it's important to note that both the tradition of science and the tradition of humanities and the arts really do impact the field of anthropology. Depending on the folks you meet, I've met biological anthropologists and archaeologists that were like, I'm a hardcore natural scientist, whereas others like myself would say, we're social scientists, but we really feel a greater alignment to ideas and feelings and people that maybe are more tendencies of the humanities and the arts. So one is not better than the other. They're just different parts of this puzzle of understanding anthropology and the social sciences. Now, I'll mention very briefly, this is more, chapter 1 is super key, so definitely read chapter 1. You should also look at chapter 13, which is part of week 1 readings. it's a little more, I would say, nuanced and giving you some insights from a historical perspective. This is by Laura Nader. Ages ago, I saw Laura Nader at the annual meetings of the American Anthropological Association, or the AAA, not to be confused with the American Automobile Association. And indeed, she's famous. She is the sister of the famous Ralph Nader, the environmental activist. You remember from the campaigns he waged against the Corvair car years ago. He ran for president and so forth. So definitely when I saw Laura Nader, it's like she's famous. It kind of have that feeling when you're at a anthro meeting and you see some of these famous people you've read about. So she'll take you through kind of the history of anthropology. You'll get some repeats of holism, of cultural relativism, some different areas as well. It sort of repeats a bit of chapter 1, and it's a strange kind of like chapter to have in the book because it doesn't fit perfectly anywhere, but it fits, I think, best at the beginning. So that's why I stuck a chapter that comes way later in the book here at chapter 1, because it has so much that focuses on classic anthropology. So I definitely recommend it to read about some of these famous anthropologists. I mentioned colonialism at the start of our conversation today. Check that out. And then a little bit about the specialization. So you get a sense at the end here of what types of specializations people take, whether it's medical anthropology or political anthropology. And also she mentions in there the idea of area studies. So when I was an undergraduate student at Indiana University, they had a big area studies program. In fact, I minored in African studies. And area studies means at a university you have what's called an interdisciplinary approach to studying all of the cultures and peoples of one area, like the peoples of Africa or of Asia. In today's day and age, it seen a little bit old-timey or a little bit traditionalist and maybe even quasi-colonialist to kind of look at everything that globally. Like I took a class in my undergraduate days in African studies on peoples and cultures of Africa. And, Africa is such an immense and vast, gigantic continent, so many cultures, so many people, so many languages. How in the world can you study, one class or one book, as it were, all of the peoples of Africa? So area studies is mentioned by Nader. It's definitely part of what I'll get to as the traditionalist kind of anthropology and social science versus the more postmodern or contemporary that we'll talk about. And here's a great example of that. So this is a piece I authored for an encyclopedia of anthropology on postmodernism and anthropology, and I'll share that with you. I think it's either this week or later in the quarter. Maybe it comes up again. So you get a sense of like how anthropology has changed over time since the days of what Laura Nader is writing about and talking about. You can read my piece on postmodernism, which talks about some of the experiences that I've considered here in contemporary anthropology. And again, specialization, the breadth of anthropology allows you to consider everything under the sun in terms of learning about whatever it is you want to study. Audience is also important. It's something that Laura Nader mentions. I wanted to show you this short piece here that I did, and as appropriate, I'll try to share these with you, but this is going back to an earlier point where I said I'm doing more work now with video and trying to use a popular audience. So I work a lot with designers in the themed and immersive entertainment industry. This is a piece I did specifically for them. So I wanted to take my knowledge of social science and anthropology and say, hey, all of you who design these cool spaces should really use research like I do. And so I put in a lot of photos. This is me here sitting at a Disney theme park, taking some notes. These are some of my field notebooks. These are what I was describing to you earlier. Some dimensions of research that people should focus on, and then 2 specific visits to an IKEA store, and then also the famous Starbucks roastery in Seattle. I was going to say Portland, but in Seattle. Very cool place. If you get a chance to go there and visit, if you love coffee, you might really enjoy that. So in any case, trying to present this to a wider audience means I'm not writing with a lot of citations. I'm not writing with an academic voice. I'm trying to really do things like have pictures and have little bulleted points and call outs that make it easy for people to read. So audience, the point that Laura Nader makes, is super, super important. I can't emphasize that enough. If you think about going on in the future, definitely think about your audience. So a little more from the anthropology meetings. I mentioned these earlier. So every year, the AAA meets in typically very expensive places like Washington, D.C., Philadelphia, or San Francisco. So it's always a hurdle going. And I know a lot of graduate students. When I was a graduate student, I remember going with a buddy of mine from our graduate program, and we split a room. The meetings were in Atlanta. It's super expensive to go. You can easily spend like $1,500 to $2,000 just attending the meetings, flying, staying at the conference hotels, which can be $200 a night and so forth. But in some cases, I have professional development funds that supported my travel. This was from a group we had years ago where we trained new anthropologists on teaching techniques. And when you go to a meeting like this, you wear these little badges and you meet a lot of people. You go to sessions. Famous and less famous anthropologists like myself present papers, and you kind of take it all in. It's really surreal going as a graduate student, and I always remember going and seeing like some of these famous anthropologists or even anthropologists I knew from various schools, kind of like in the lobby, maybe drinking a little bit too much in between sessions and just some of the behaviors. And it's like, oh, this is interesting. Getting that perspective, on some of the people maybe who are your professors or people you've read about in books, and you're like, wow, that's that person. And look what they're doing in the lobby of the hotel. Nothing bad. Don't get me wrong. But generally, it's like, I don't know, sometimes you don't want to see famous anthropologists kind of doing some of those behaviors in a public lobby when you're there maybe for the meetings and stuff. But it's definitely a place you go to see a lot of those famous people. You can take part in panels. I presented papers. I've organized panels myself there. And this is the main AAA website. So just go to americananthro.org if you're interested. And this has everything about the discipline of anthropology. There's also cool career information you could check out and more information specifically about the subfields and so forth. Looking at this, I know these videos sometimes are a little bit long, and again, you can always kind of check out when you want to and check the stuff that interests you. In this case, I'm talking a little bit about my research, and this is when I was working at a theme park in Houston, Texas. I was a trainer there, and this is kind of one of the rituals that went on with employees where you passed people over. Kind of like, I don't know if it's a Native American ritual. These trainers came in and did this with us, and I always remember when I was a person on the top, I was worried they're going to drop me or something like that. But in any case, I'm presenting my research here to a group of researchers in Germany, learning more about it. And so one of the things you do in anthropology is you study something, you write and publish articles or books about what you study. And I'll share with you from time to time some of the books I've published and collections I've edited. But you also present your papers at academic conferences. So when you go to a conference, you present information to people and you have debates about those topics. So this is just us at one of these conferences in Germany talking, I believe, about theme parks. This is from the Westin Bonaventure with another group of German cultural theorists who started this project and actually invited me to teach in Germany. So I had the opportunity to teach there at the Johannes Gutenberg University in Mainz, Germany. And this is a panel that we organized at the Westin Bonaventure in Los Angeles, and we presented to an audience. So it's one of the things you do is what's called peer research. And peer research means that other people respond to what you're studying. You write about something and then people review it. It's called peer review. Or you go to a conference and people debate the ideas that you have presented to them. So it's just really important to contrast peer research that we do in the social sciences with what happens, say, again, on talk radio, or people who spread conspiracy theories about vaccines on YouTube, on Twitter, on Facebook. And although some of that is getting controlled, it's really hard because the stuff I study will not make a difference in terms of life and death. But for people doing research with vaccines and medicine, it's a really big deal if people maybe have the wrong information and that negatively affects their health. This is another presentation I did in North Lake Tahoe for a group of, it was called the Western Aerosol Research Group, or the Western, I forget, it had the word aerosol in it, and they were on the West. So they asked me to come in and talk about social change. This was back on 2012, and kind of an irony of this was the day after this, I believe, you can look this up, I think it must have been September 13th, was the attack on the Libyan embassy, the American embassy in Benghazi, which was kind of a big deal. But I say it was ironic because one of the examples I used in here was the so-called Arab Spring, where in a lot of places in Egypt and Libya at the time, there was more, Syria, I believe, there was more modernization going on where people were developing different political ideologies and they were kind of breaking away from the autocratic or authoritarian regimes and some of the cultures of the past. So I was using this as a good example. And then once you know it, the next day, we had this attack that was connected with, I forget the particular terrorist group, but talking here about social change. And the point I'm trying to make showing you this is that it's not an academic context I'm presenting my research, but I'm trying to, again, present to a wider audience. So once again, really think about what Laura Nader said in terms of how research can be used and should be thought of in terms of the specific audience that you're interfacing with. If you want to check out my main website, it's scottlucas.com. And I know I'm hitting you a lot with my research, but it's very instructive, I think, because it gives you a sense of how anthropologists can take these ideas that you learn about, just like all of you in a cultural anthro class, and run with them, doing research. If you want to, you could click on things I've written, and some of these are available for free, and this just shows you some of the books I've written. Have had books translated into Arabic, which is kind of cool. I've also written more in the realm of pop culture on horror and sci-fi film remakes, criminological theory. This is that group that developed the teaching stuff I talked about at the AAA meetings, and you can also just check out some of my articles. You'll get a few of these during the quarter, like my piece on tiki cultures or subcultures. I've written about video games, the Hummer, a lot of different topics. So feel free to look through this again. Different audiences, different considerations, but always trying to apply a peer-reviewed, instructive, research-based approach. Check out the work of the late David Graeber. He was very significant, very important in terms of his studies of politics and capitalism and activism. He died suddenly during the COVID crisis. I'm not sure the cause of death, if it was COVID, but really important voice in contemporary anthropology. So I just really encourage you to look at one of his pieces that I have shared for you as a video, because he was so revolutionary, and it's such a tragedy that his life was taken as soon as it was. There isn't any additional reading, but if you do get a week, like week 2 and on, where you have additional readings, you'll just find those by clicking on your modules, and it's easily structured here so you could see that. So it'll just say reading additional for each week. And then when you find that, you just click on the reading. Like in week 2, there's a lot about cultural appropriation that you'll read about. So check all that out for week 2. What else? And I think that's it. So the themes for this week, just to kind of summarize things, would be, understanding what anthropology is, understanding the perspectives of anthropology. So all that stuff from the videos I presented to you, watch those if you get a chance. All the stuff from chapter 1 of the textbook that talks about holism and comparison and science and humanism. And then research, really delving into the importance of doing research, discovering the world on your own, using what we call peer-based research, like in my examples, and not just making a quick decision about something, as we saw in the case of talk radio or even former presidents who completely dismiss a culture or a way of living because they just don't understand it. So the greatest thing you could take from this class, the number one thing, is perspective. Again, it's the art of awareness, we say in cultural anthropology. If you can gain more awareness about the world, I'm not going to tell you, how you should vote or how you should think or how you should eat. But if you have more information as a background to the decisions that you make in the world, hopefully that will allow you to do a form of what Noam Chomsky, the famous linguist and political activist, calls intellectual self-defense. Make decisions for your own. Do the research on your own. Don't just believe whatever the media tells you or a politician or even I tell you or someone in your family tells you. Question everything, question authority, all that kind of stuff we talk about, but definitely use the perspective that you gain in cultural anthropology to practice forms of intellectual self-defense and empowerment, and hopefully making a difference in the lives of people and the world around you. So that's it for week 1. We'll be back every week again with another one of these lectures to go over the key themes of the week.